Hello. Ah. Wonderful to see everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sylvain Cordier. I'm the Paul Mellon curator and head of the Department of European Art here at VMFA. And I'm very happy, very honored to present tonight our annual Paul Mellon Lecture. The Paul Mellon Lecture is an extraordinary event which was established in the memory of Paul Mellon, the museum's longest-serving trustee and one of its most generous benefactors. Its aim is to foster the study and appreciation of the arts, and it is supported by the Paul Mellon Endowment. As this year's Paul Mellon Lecturer, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. George Shackelford. George comes to us from Fort Worth, Texas, where he has been the Deputy Director of the Kimball Art Museum since 2012. Before being at the Kimball, he was Chair of the Department of the Art of Europe at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And before that, he was the Curator of European Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. He received his PhD from Yale University. George is an extraordinary organizer of one-of-a-kind exhibitions and one of the most internationally celebrated specialists of the end of the 19th century French art, and in particular Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. We're very, very honored that he is coming to lecture for us tonight. Among his exhibition projects were Degas' The Dancers, which he curated for the National Gallery, Degas' Landscapes, which he curated for the MFA Houston. When curator in Boston, he curated Monet in the 20th century, Marie Cassatt, Modern Woman, Van Gogh Face to Face, Impressionist Still Lifes, Gauguin in Tahiti, and Degas and the Nude. And since he has been at the Kimball, he curated, among many other projects, Faces of Impressionism portraits from the Musée d'Orsay, Gustave Caillebotte, The Painter's Eye, Monet the Early Years, and its sequel, Monet the Late Years, as well as Renoir, The Body, The Senses. His most recent exhibition, Bonnard's Worlds, was presented at the Kimball and at the Phillips Collection in Washington in 2023-2024. And it's about the delightful subject of Pierre Bonnard's oeuvre and life and world that he is going to talk tonight. So please join me in welcoming Dr. George Shackelford.
Thank you so much, Sylvain. And thank you all for being here tonight. It's really a great pleasure to be back in Richmond and to see so many people out in the audience and having, I hope you'll have a good time with our talk tonight. As Sylvain told you, the last show that I organized in Fort Worth was Bonnard's Worlds, which was prompted by the Kimball's acquisition in 2018 of this painting, The Landscape at Le Canet, which he painted probably around 1928. Here he is here's the landscape in its fullness. There he is in the foreground, just here. And here is his little house. More about this in just a minute. Here he is, depicted by his friend Edouard Vuillard with the painting in his Paris apartment. And in it, as I said before, you see the house over at the far left-hand margin. Tonight, I want to talk to you about the various places that Bonnard called home across the, his 80 years of life, and some of the ways in which he inhabited these places and made them the subject of his art. The first place that we could call home with Pierre Bonnard, that we have a record of in his art, is a house that was called Grand-Lemps in the Dauphinois part of Paris, down in the southeast corner of Paris, not too far from a place like Grenoble. And there his grandmother, his maternal grandmother, ruled over the roost with the family gatherings, which included Bonnard, his mother and father, his sister, André, who is there in white. Their father is seated. Her husband is at the far left, and probably their cousin Berthe is in the checked dress, and the people in the background are made up. They're not real. But these people, gathering around, petting dogs, eating, having a little snack in the garden are very much real, as we learn from Bonnard's photographs that he took. Bonnard was handy with a Kodak camera and was loved taking photographs of his family in the gardens around Grand-Lemps in the late 1890s and early 1900s. That's the moment where he was at his most Japanizing. A friend of his called him the Japanizing Nabi, the group of the artists called the Nabis, he and Vuillard and Maurice Denis and Félix Vallotton. And they were very interested in decorations. And in fact, in the collection here in Richmond, at the far left here, you have a wonderful decoration of apple picking, which forms part of a series of paintings meant to hang together, though not necessarily conceived for a particular interior, that are all about this place, this farm and its garden at Grand-Lemps. And here you see some more of them. The two on the right are outside Tokyo at the Polo Museum. And here they're all together in Paris at an exhibition on Nabi decoration a few years ago. That's the place where all these families gathered. And here you see the Terrace family. His sister had married Claude Terrace. That's the man in the white suit at the left. André is in pink near the right. And surrounding them are a passel of children. There are too many for them to be actually all theirs. And we think mother is here, and this might be grandmother. This house still exists, and I have never been there. It's not a place where you would go for any other reason than to go there. But we've all probably been to the part of Paris that he lived in from the late 1890s and always kept an apartment at some part of Paris for the entirety of the rest of his life. He lived in the foothills of Montmartre, usually near the Place de Clichy. This is the Boulevard de Clichy. And he was very much a denizen of that sort of artsy, craftsy, vanguard group of artists. His first really great commercial success was with the poster for France Champagne that you see at the left here. The other is for the Revue Blanche, a magazine published by his friends, the Natanson. And he was a raving success at age about 20 with this fantastic poster. And it is, in fact, the poster that inspired Toulouse-Lautrec to take up the making of posters. So that's how good it was. From his apartment, he could look down on the Boulevard de Clichy nearby, and on various parts of that boulevard. And he could see what was happening in Paris and see what was all around him. The life of the street in Paris is one of the very important early subjects of his art. And while he does not depict very many details of the places where he lived, you'll see a few in a minute, he was very interested in what was happening out on the street. Here in the Place Clichy, or the tramway, the green tramway, we see what might be an image of his then girlfriend, Marthe de Melligny. Marthe de Melligny is the name that she told him she bore. She was actually named Maria Boursin. She told him she was younger than she was. But from when they met in 1893, they were together until her death in 1942. More on that later, but she became his muse and the most important subject for his art. He, as I said, was taking photographs hither and thither. He was making paintings. You can see paintings of her up on the walls, including, to the left here, Man and Woman from about 1900, and I contrast it with a portrait of Madame Bonnard, as she was called, even though they weren't yet married. Everybody knew her as Madame Bonnard, painted by Vuillard. And here they are, Madame and Monsieur Bonnard together. Vuillard captured, I think, a very lively likeness of Marthe, who seems by all accounts at this period in their life particularly to have been very garrulous, liked by all of Bonnard's friends, liked by their dog who was named Black. And it might be the yearning for a little bit more exercise for Black that they began to seek out places that they could go in the country. There's Black asleep at Marthe's feet. And there she is yawning at a picnic lunch. So they kept renting houses that were just sort of on the outskirts of Paris, not too far from the city. You know, any place where you could get on a train and be back in Paris in 20 minutes or half an hour was fine. This, for instance, is a garden in a little town called Vernon. But they settled around 1910 on a town called Vernon. And those of you who have ever gone out to Monet's garden at Giverny via the train may remember that you get off the train in the town of Vernon, like Vernon. Vernon is a part of that city, but it's on the opposite side of the river, on the opposite side of the Seine. And that is where they found a place to live. Now, in the background of the photograph at the left, you see Vernon. And I think that's the Bonnard house. I'm not quite sure. This is certainly the Bonnard house right here in this painting that Bonnard did. I think it's 1915 or something like that. This is a view of a similar view by Claude Monet here in the Richmond collection, to give you an idea that this was going up on a hill and painting your house with the Seine in the background was kind of something that people did. If you had a house on the Seine, which indeed Bonnard did. And here is a painting that he did of it. Not a really great painting, but it is very lifelike, because here is the house. Now, the house has changed a good bit since Bonnard and his wife left. The plate glass windows with sliding doors on the upper level have been put in. Otherwise, the fenestration on the lower level is exactly as it was before. And the now quite rickety railing around the balcony that wraps around the house and ends up becoming the balcony of a terrace off to the left, is in place as it was before. There's the balcony wrapping around the terrace up here, a big chestnut tree, and stairs down into the garden that you see here and here. And this is a scene of a lot of activity in Bonnard's life, and many paintings, many great paintings like this one from the Phillips collection called the Terrace, originally called the Wild Garden, and this famous one from the Metropolitan in New York, which I think is certainly represents that terrace and was probably begun in the 1920s, but not really finished until much later when a new level of color was applied. There's Marthe sitting under the shade of the balcony. And you see behind her the door and window that you'll recognize in this magnificent painting from the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, The Dining Room in the Country. And there is Marthe looking in on us. This painting is I think it's about 5 feet wide, maybe a little more. It's a really imposing painting. And it shows Marthe, and here you see Marthe and Pierre with their sailboat at right, and then you see them as conceived by a filmmaker. go see this painting for the scenery, but not for the truth of the story. Go see this movie, that is, if it ever comes out on Netflix. But living just a few miles from Claude Monet, they began to be friends with Claude Monet, and they were friends with lots of people who would come down and visit them, have dinner at the local restaurant. But here's a drawing made by Bonnard of Monet with Marthe sitting next to him at lunch at Giverny, and a later photograph of Bonnard and Monet in the garden, Monet probably talking to him about plantings. It's my idea, my thesis, that seeing Bonnard's great dining room in the country is what prompted Monet, who was painting pictures of the scale of the one you see at the left, to start painting big. And it's literally the next year that he orders himself dozens of large-scale canvases and starts painting the big studies, like unto the irises here in Richmond, that would eventually inform the creation of his water lily garden cycle at the Orangerie. So it's a case of a young man influencing the much older man. The life around them on the Seine was very beautiful, and they would often go boating. Here you see them on the balcony having a chat. Introduced into this life was a friend who became a friend of Marthe's and then became, unfortunately, a love interest of her husband. But it's a very peculiar thing because everybody talks about Renée Montchâty is the girl's name. You see her in a portrait that Bonnard painted of her at the left, and then you see her in an image that was created, finished long after her death. The Renée Montchâty entered their lives during World War I and was present, and happily so, with them a lot. And in 1921, she and Bonnard everybody was invited to go to Rome, and Bonnard and Renée Montchâty went, leaving Marthe behind in the south of France. And everybody thinks that they had an affair, and maybe they did. But it is in 1925 that Marthe, I think, lays down the law and says, we have to get married now. And it was after after the marriage of Pierre and Marthe, that Renée committed suicide about a month later. We don't really have any of the exact details, so there's a lot of guessing and a lot of myth-making. But what we do know is that Marthe remains his inspiration. And here in a decoration that he painted for a client, we see Marthe with her, you saw her beautiful, rather lithe, compact body in the photograph that I showed you a moment ago. And here she is being Eve to Bonnard's Adam, just here, in a terrestrial paradise with the Seine River in their backyard as the background. So if this was paradise on the banks of the Seine, why go anyplace else? But, in fact, like many artists, Bonnard, around 1900, it was probably 1905, that he first really went down to the Mediterranean to see what the light of the south of France was like. Remember, he has grown up in Paris and the environs of Paris, and his country house is in the east near the Alps, in the foothills of the Alps. He's not really experienced the Mediterranean world. And he goes down and he follows along the train that many of these people took. Everybody was taking a holiday in Cannes or Nice or Antibes. And he goes down there, and this becomes something that he and Marthe do regularly. Here's a postcard of Antibes, and here is a nicely coordinated balcony in a hotel at Antibes that they went to stay in the months following the end of World War I. Similarly, in the painting here in Richmond, we see him taking advantage of the view of the Mediterranean through his almost certainly a hotel room window. as Matisse was taking advantage of the similar view from his hotel room overlooking the Promenade des Anglais on the seashore in Nice. Windows become a fascinating subject in the art of Bonnard, and often they are in rented houses. He and Marthe liked to go from place to place. I think it was particularly Marthe who wanted to go to spa towns where she could take the waters. We believe that she suffered from tuberculosis, and it got worse as she got older. She was not cured from it. She began in the 1930s to also be quite misanthropic, which is sometimes a side effect of tuberculosis. And so they would go and rent like a house or a flat. And these two paintings, one is made certainly in Arcachon on the left, and we don't know the location exactly of the painting on the right. But they settled in around 1923-24, they discovered Le Cannet. And Le Cannet is a northern suburb of Cannes. It's not very far at all from the water. And at Le Cannet, in the I think 23-24, Bonnard painted this picture at the Phillips Collection, one of his most enchanting early views of the Mediterranean landscape. And it is directly this that leads to the painting that I began my talk with at the Kimball Art Museum. Now, this location is what I'm really going to talk to you about tonight. And this is the house, this is the location of the house that Bonnard and Marthe bought in 1926. It is now, and it was then, a very small house. It was not set up for house guests. That's kind of smart, I think, actually. There were plenty of nearby hotels. And really, it is just a couple of rooms per floor. There you see it again at the left-hand side of this picture. It's on a hill looking down onto the city of Le Cannet, and Cannes and the Mediterranean are way off to the left. Up the hill and behind us is a still mounting hill. It's not at the top of the hill, it's sort of halfway up. And this is where Bonnard has stretched out with some goats over here. This is the nose of a cow. There you can see. I think it's a cow. He's good with dogs, not so good with bovine animals. And it's from this, it's this view up behind the house where he used to take a walk almost every morning of his life. There's the steps up to the house. And there's the house on the hill. Now, this little bit of property is Bonnard's house. The house is called Le Bosquet, or the grove, the glade. You're seeing the top story here with big windows looking out onto trees, and then down here you could see the Mediterranean if you're standing at those windows. It's high enough. But it was pretty unsettled when Pierre and Marthe moved there in 1926. They had gotten married in 1925. And it's really a bit overbuilt now. This is thank you to Google Earth, at which you can fly over your house. In fact, and you can fly over anybody's house on Google Earth. And it gives you this amazing sense of how this little bitty house has survived all the way to the present day. It is owned now by a great nephew of Bonnard, whose father, one of Bonnard's nephews, bought it out of the undivided Bonnard estate in the years after his death. And still very beautifully maintained. In fact, it's a listed building, so they have to get permission to do anything. Any changes have to get permission from the government. And as I said, nearby are places that Bonnard liked to walk. This is a canal right here, paved canal that had a walkway beside it. And that is what appears, I believe, in this painting from Santa Barbara from the 1940s, maybe 30s. And there's one of the surviving bridges made out of concrete that you see in the lower right-hand corner of the full painting. This is the view that he would have had on his way back down the hill towards the house, which is here. And this window is in the bathroom. You'll see more later. So from this hillside elevated view, Bonnard contemplated the world every morning of his life. Now, they tended to live in Le Cannet in the wintertime and in Vernon in the summertime. So summer in the north, winter in the south. They drove every year. Bonnard's notebooks are fascinating. They tell you where they stopped in their sort of 4-day descent from the north of France down to the south. They didn't push themselves. They probably had paintings strapped to the roof of the car. It's said that on one of these trips, some paintings fell off. So if your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was vacationing in France and picked up a painting on the side of the road, it might be a Bonnard. He loved his car and sort of went everywhere in it. But I think they really did love this place on the side of the hill. As I said, it's about halfway up the hill, and it's a steep walk down into the town, but you get a sense of how close the town is when you look at this photograph. And there is the terrace in front of the house, which you see at the far right, and a couple of other views of the terrace right beside the house. It's surrounded by a garden which is very, very wild and tangled, and it never was a garden in a very formal sense. I mean, it certainly had things that had been planted in it, flowering trees, for instance, but it was not meant to be a very formal garden. It was very sort of rustic and kind of magnificently overgrown, and that's exactly what it is nowadays. And certainly what it was when Bonnard painted this picture the first year that they moved into the house. This is a painting you all may know. It's at the Phillips Collection in Washington, one of the greatest of their Bonnards, called The Palm. And in it, I think you see him casting Marthe. Again, is she Eve? Is she the Roman goddess Pomona who would hand an apple? Is often depicted with an apple. She's there on this terrace overlooking the distant view of the city of Le Cannet with this very peculiar lone apartment building standing in the middle of nowhere. And it's hearkening back to a picture of a few years earlier that he had painted on the terrace in Vernon at the house that he called Ma Roulotte, my caravan. Terraces, and we're going to sort of take a walking tour of Bonnard's lives now. Terraces were a very important locus of activity in Bonnard's family, as you saw from the terrace view with all the family in front of the house in the Vernon, in Grand-Lemps, down in the Dauphiné. And that's where this amazing painting called Before Noon is set. This is one of Bonnard's sort of late paintings from probably 1945 or 46. He dies in 1947. And it is filled with the most beautiful pulsating light. It can be yours if you want to buy it. And I feel sure that it is what is conceived as the new setting for the painting that he repaints in the early 1940s of René Montchaty, who we talked about earlier, who has died in 1925. So before they bought the house in Le Cannet, so it can't be on the terrace of Le Cannet. I think this painting was first intended to be the terrace at the house in Normandy. And then after René dies, and after Marthe dies, by this time they sold the house in Normandy, Bonnard repaints the picture and turns it into a view of the south of France by adding all of this gorgeous yellow. There's a great quote from Bonnard that he is said to have said to one of his nephews who was helping him he asked the nephew, would you put just a bit more yellow paint just there? And he said to the nephew, you can't have too much yellow. Going into the house, we find Bonnard in and one of the dachshunds. I reckon he had about 6 or 7 dachshunds over time. It's kind of hard to keep track of them because they named them all Poussette. Poussette is the French name for the fairy tale that we call Thumbelina. And this is the quite Spartan. Now, mind you, this photograph was taken during World War II. But very Spartan interior of Bonnard's main room on the ground floor of this house. It was made out of 2 rooms. There had been a wall just here where this beam goes across, but they knocked it all into one room, and it had, a radiator at one end. There's a fireplace at the other end, some cabinets, not very comfy furniture, and it still is very Spartan. I suspect that the fainting couch is an addition of the later owners, because it was said that Bonnard preferred a certain discomfort. It suited him. This was the main living room of their house in Le Cannet, and here are some photographs that I took in it. And here are 3 paintings dedicated to that wall as they were hanging in Bonnard's Worlds at the Phillips Collection last year. An electric light up here at the top, and harsh shadows from above cast by the electric light. This is a nighttime painting. That's also true of this, which is just the inside of one of the cupboards, and a third. And there you can see how they relate to each other. So this is this cupboard, and this is the bottom, I think, of this cupboard. And there's my photograph of their China collection on the inside of this same image, and of the other door with the glass door, and this very unusual little half shelf here to make it easier to get stuff that was at the back. It's a setup that he painted again and again, including in the beautiful painting here in Richmond, which I'm going to come back to in a little bit. But what I wanted to concentrate on in the Richmond painting now is how wonderful the tabletop is. And once you had gotten inside the house, Bonnard often was directing your attention, as an artist, I mean, not as a guest, to tabletops. And he loves to paint a tabletop. Here's a lithograph that he made for a cover for an album of lithographs published by Vollard. Here are 2 paintings of Marthe and one of their many dogs named Poussette at table. And the concentration on the patterning of the tabletop, using the pattern of the checked tablecloth to direct your attention to the dog, who is really the protagonist of the painting. Everybody else's gesture is determined by the dog. We are the artist. We have gotten up from our coffee, which is just here. Someone is bringing in a little aperitif, not an aperitif, a digestif, a little cognac there. Or here, we are sitting across the table from Marthe. We can tell we're across the table because there's the wine bottle that's in front of our place at the table. And there is Poussette in her arms. This is as close to a painting of maternity as Bonnard comes. He and Marthe never had children, and the dogs really take on a great importance in their lives. They're everywhere. And cats also, and kittens, and a sleeping dog back here. Still lives. He's a brilliant painter of still lives. This is one in the Cleveland Museum of Art, the same tabletop as in the Richmond painting. And this is the self-same table setup. And so is this. So you see how incredibly varied they could be. He loved to paint flowers. Here is the mimosas that bloomed in the backyard every year, just at the end of winter and the beginning of spring. A summertime still life filled with fruits in one of those baskets with an extra tall handle that he liked. And here's an example, maybe the very same basket. In that corner, by now you will have recognized the architecture of this room with this cabinet in the back. And I'm pretty sure that that's what this is also. These fantastic paintings. These are both from very late in his life. And there was another location in this house where meals were taken. And it was upstairs in a suite of rooms that really belonged to Marthe. A bedroom, a little boudoir, and then a bathroom. And he does an amazing series of paintings in the little boudoir. Here's a photograph from that room. The door to the right goes into her bedroom. It's never open, not used by the family. And the door at the left goes into the bathroom. And there you see Bonnard standing at it. I also have a picture of me standing at it, but I didn't put that in. In the room, there's a little bitty fireplace and some of the original furniture from the 1920s. And there you see the fireplace sort of transformed by Bonnard as a setting for this beautiful still life of anemones with Marthe as if she's sort of picking up a leaf that must have fallen or a petal that must have fallen off of the arrangement. This window becomes an absolute fixation for him. And I'm going to show you a series of paintings that concentrate on this very window. But just to remind you, that is a subject that he liked to do from much earlier. Here's one from around 1920 at the Phillips collection called The Open Window, with either Marthe or Renee here. In spite of the fact that her hair is kind of blonde, I think it's probably meant to be Marthe, playing with a little cat. Never miss looking at the corners of a painting by Bonnard. There's often something really important hanging out there for you to notice. Here is a dog, another one of the Poussettes, but you wouldn't recognize immediately where that dog is in space. And this painting used to belong to a private collector in Fort Worth. And when we had it on view at the Kimball, I kept trying to figure out how does that room work? And it was only on seeing paintings like this that I realized that the dog is in the mirror, and the mirror is hanging to the right of the doorway. That's Marthe's head in the mirror reflected from the back, and Bonnard is there looking into the mirror from across the table. There's the radiator that you saw in the photograph, and amazingly, there is a Rothko, just kidding, over the radiator about 20 years before he started painting paintings like that. The different ways that this room could look, the different aspects of the view, is elucidated by this comparison of the three. And this is how they were hanging together at the Kimball. And you see how very different the view is. I mean, the landscape has not changed. It's Bonnard who has changed how he wants to depict it. There's a wonderful quote from Bonnard, who was lucky. We art historians were lucky. And in one of his later pocket diaries, he would just write stuff down. And you know how an art historian loves a good quote. There's several really good ones in Bonnard. One is, it's not about, it's not about painting life. It's about making painting come alive. That's a good one. And then he says, people talk all the time about being impressed or being what's the word? I'm sorry, I'm hearing it in my head and not saying it out of my mouth. People talk all the time about the power of nature, and I am more concerned with the power that the painting has. In other words, don't worry about nature; it can take care of itself. Start worrying about your painting and making a great painting. So the change in the view outside the window, which of course had not changed at all, has to do with Bonnard making each painting do the work that it has to do and making us a set of decisions based on the needs that the painting has. And as you can see, he continues to paint this room. This is one in Grenoble. This is one in a private collection. And the tabletops become cuckoo, crazy. They defy gravity. The square painting on the right is a picture that I have rotated in Photoshop again and again and again to try to see, does it work better if we turn it another 90 degrees? And the only way it works is like this. But as you could see, it is absolutely defiant of any law of nature, with the tiny chair that is not that far away to have gotten to be quite so little. A magnificent painting. One of the reasons why Bonnard could paint, could let the painting be the dictator of its needs rather than nature, is that Bonnard never painted in front of the motif. He carried bits of paper and pencil with him, and he'd make drawings a lot, make little sketches he kept in the pocket diary. He'd pull that out and make a sketch in it. But he never took a canvas to the landscape and painted in front of the landscape. And he never even took a canvas from one room in the house to another. In fact, everything was painted in the studio. And here you see him in his studio at work on the Richmond painting, which is just here. And do you remember the painting I showed you a little bit earlier of the inside of the cupboard? That's this. That's one of the paintings of the inside of the cupboard. And this is a famous almond tree in bloom. So he didn't stretch his paintings on easels. He cut the commercially primed canvas out into a shape and tacked it up, nailed it up to the wall and painted like that. That's how you could roll the painting up and take it from the south of France to the north of France in the summer on top of your car if you wanted to. I mean, it was very effective and very efficient. But he never painted this thing in the room in which it represents. And after all, even if he did, it doesn't much look like the room. I mean, where did these yellow and blue stripes come from? We know the cabinets were never painted pink and blue. The marble around the fireplace is kind of bluish, but certainly there was never orange paint on these walls. And that has to do, I think, really with Bonnard wanting to make a better painting out of it than a realistic one. And it happens, I think, this painting is quite late in Bonnard's art, and it happens that it was, I believe that it must have been underway when he and Matisse did a temporary painting swap. And he sent to Matisse the still life that you see at the left, and Matisse sent him the painting that you see at the right, which is at the Kimball, and which is called Asia. it's a painting that Matisse had made in 1946. And so it's a brand new work that's being delivered to his friend Bonnard. Matisse is down in Nice. The painting probably came up by train and car, and up it goes, and Bonnard hangs it on the walls of this room, where he admires how it changes as the day goes by, and comments to Matisse that in the morning, the blues are imported, and at night, by electric light, mind you, it's the reds that shine up. I don't think it's the reflected red from Matisse's Asie that makes these walls red, but it's the preoccupation with color at that late stage in his life that I think is reflected in the beautiful painting here in Richmond. These color photographs of Bonnard in the studio show you what an unholy mess his work table is. Whenever my desk gets bad, I call one of these up and say, well, you know what, that genius comes from messiness. And here it is up close. Here's a still life in your collection of drawings that probably reflects some of the same disorder. And here, in a slightly better arrangement, this is what the studio looks like now. The part at the left, where the desk is high and has that wonderful wall with a big plate glass window, many sheets of plate glass looking in. There's another little window up here. This is where there was a daybed and a little cabinet, very much like the other cabinets that were built in the 1920s. And you can walk up these stairs and turn around and look at what's happening on the wall down below. And this is what you see out the window in the 1940s when the mimosa is in bloom. And this is what I saw. This is not mimosa. It just happens to look kind of golden. This is what I saw in early September of 2021, I think. Yes. Fantastic view out onto the thing. This is what that little cabinet looks like now, but this is what it looked like when Bonnard was living there, with a map on the wall, little pieces of Japanese paper that he liked, a Monet postcard of the Orangerie, a Vermeer, a cast of a ancient sculpture, Seurat, Gauguin, color postcards of the neighborhood, and then up here, a reproduction of a painting by an artist that he was interested in named Pablo Picasso, who famously went off in a huge diatribe about how horrible a painter Bonnard is. Because he never can make his mind up. He can't figure out what he's going to do. He's constantly painting the same painting again and again and again. Well, of course, he understood exactly how Bonnard was working. He just didn't think it was manly enough. You know, if you don't finish a painting all at once, you haven't really done it right. And so Bonnard, who did not paint a painting all at once and often would take 10 years to finish a painting, just didn't suit Picasso at all. That does not make him a bad painter, of course. He was a simple man living a very modest life. Matisse said, come down and live at the Hotel Regina. This is during the war. The food's better here. It's warmer. You won't have to worry about heating. And Bonnard said, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that. You know, I just don't think I'd like the clientele at the Hotel Regina. He was not the only artist in the house. In the 1920s, Marthe took up the subject of art herself. And here she is, posed behind her self-portrait and her portrait of Bonnard. She was quite short, but the paintings must have been quite big. Here she is in her passport photograph. And here she is in that movie. Like I said, don't rely on this movie for anything but nice photography. And she was a pretty good artist. Very, very straightforward. She did paintings and she had an exhibition in 1924 at a decent gallery in Paris. Wonderful pastels. I wish this was mine. A view out her bedroom window, probably. Compare it to Bonnard's view out a window of an apartment that they had rented in Le Cannet before they bought. And these wonderful still lives with great sort of centered compositions, interestingly like the kinds of things that he's painting of a still like on the seat of a chair. Their dogs, love the thing at the right. And this is the grown-up Marthe, not the nymph that he first met, who was this girl. This is from 1893. This is the year they met. And here we are, having been in the boudoir and the studio, we are now behind the door and have gone into the bedroom with Pierre and Marthe. This is what Marthe was like in 1893, this is what he thought she was like in 1893. Here's a painting from about 1900 that I think is so moving, where he saw her asleep and then decided to paint her asleep. Here is Man and Woman from 1900, a painting which would seem to be so incredibly private, him and Marthe, of him and Marthe, and both of them naked, but they sold it to their friend Thaddée Nathanson. It's one of three spectacular paintings from 1900 in which he explores the nude in these very moody interiors. And the idea of himself and her at the same time with her nude is explored also in this drawing, where he's looking and showing what he sees in a mirror. I think this must have been drawn from life, or at least his part of it. But now we go back to the bedroom, to the boudoir, rather, in the house at Le Cannet. And you saw the open door into the bathroom here at the left. Sorry. I keep mistaking the pointer for the advanced one. And there's the radiator. That's where the Rothko is, by the way, hanging there. They must have sold it. And you go through that door and you see this bathtub. And this is my panoramic. Oh, I'm sorry. I lost my place. Painting the bathtub was something that he had been doing since the 1920s. And painting actual tubs rather than as you're going to see in a minute, this sort of flat bath that was more common in a Parisian apartment in the time around 1900. Having running water and a tub that you could soak in was something that Marthe really, really wanted. And I think they had first had it in an apartment they rented in the 20s. And so when they got the house in Le Cannet, this kind of setup with a dressing table here with a pitcher, a wash bowl, etc., a mirror, or as you see it here, a flat tub on the ground, a kind of like a giant paella pan that you would stand in and pour the water over yourself. This is like a Degas tub. And the painting is like a Degas too. And that tub was not what she wanted in the house at Le Cannet. She wanted a tub like you see at the right, where you could get down in, soak, where you could wash yourself properly, and where there was a drain so that you didn't have to empty that flat pan full of water down some drain out in the hall. Marthe is her bathing is often tied to a notion of a kind of illness, and it might, in fact, hypercleanliness is something that you want to do if you are infected with tuberculosis. So perhaps these two things are related. We just don't have enough evidence to know for sure. But the bathroom became one of the most important rooms in the house in Le Cannet, and certainly, from the point of view of making of art, it was the most important room. Here you pretty much see everything. The door jamb is just here. There's the bathtub, a little table, a little stool, a French door opening onto a little balcony, a sink, a mirror over the sink, a half of a radiator, not bent wood chair, another double window, not a door this time, just a window looking out. Under here, there is a bidet. I doubt that it was there in 1926. And that's the light switch, looming quite large in this panoramic photograph. And here, just to give you a sense of the details around the room. It's a really beautiful, very simple room. And it is the subject of many, many great paintings. The one on the left is in Athens. The one on the right is at MoMA. And you see how directly inspired they are by what he has seen and retained in memory and gone literally around the corner down to the studio to commit to paint. That's the MoMA view. In this case, I suspect it might be winter because the not only is the door shut here, but also the shutter is shut. And we're seeing through the slats of the shutter, but the light is coming in so strongly that it is going through this curtain that's drawn partly over the window. And you see she's leaning on the little sink here. There's the little stool that's still here. There's the end of the tub. The table seems to have changed, but don't count on him to paint it exactly the color it actually was. The floor was linoleum, not the fancy tile. I suspect that when the linoleum wore out, they weren't able to replace it with linoleum, and so they went to tile to upgrade. But this tub is the scene of certainly some of Bonnard's very greatest paintings, and we were very lucky to be able to borrow these two, which were painted in 1937 and 38, 39. This one at the left from the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris, and at the right, the last of these in private hands in a private collection in Germany. They are magical paintings. Remember that Marthe was in her 20s when they met in 1893, and here we are 40 years later. This is a 6-year-old lady in this tub. And as you can see, Bonnard is not necessarily a slave to nature. She stays, in the bathtub painting, she stays the woman that she was when they first met. And there is a tenderness to them. I think I have a really big slide. There you go. And here's her profile, you see. Just her nose, her mouth, her eye closed. This is where the waterline goes just under, like the neckline of a dress there. And the beautifully observed changes in color of her skin beneath. This is her hand that's coming out of the water just a little bit here. And her legs down below, her feet, beautifully drawn feet. Hardly anything there, but you can see exactly what he means. This is the second version where the tub has gotten bigger vis-a-vis the body. And it was painted mostly in Normandy in a rented hotel room. And imagine, instead of on the studio wall, the white painted studio wall, all he had in this rented hotel room was really bad wallpaper. And nonetheless, he tacked the painting up on it and went to town. It is, however, a very beautiful thing, and the rendering of the blue and white linoleum, particularly gorgeous. I wanted to call your attention to the tiles in this room, because people who had been there before me said, "Oh, you're going to be so surprised. It's the most ordinary little bathroom. There's nothing to it. It's just it's like IKEA, and you get there and it's just not that at all." The tiles are all white, but they're not all the same white. And as you can see, even in my bad slide, some of them are a little bit greener than others. Some are kind of yellow, some are kind of pink, some are kind of blue. And this is absolutely what he is playing on. The memory of the shimmering glaze on those tiles and the slightly different colors of the not very standardized white that they are is something that he has clearly remembered and is dealing with in the background of these magnificent paintings. And there they are as they were at the Kimball in 2023. This is the last one of them, and it was begun before Bonnard, before Marthe died in 1942, but certainly worked on into the mid-40s and never actually signed and finished. It bears the studio stamp, which means that he wasn't ready to sell it or didn't have an occasion to sell it before he died, and so it was never hand-signed, it was stamp-signed. But it is a marvel. This is in Pittsburgh at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. And just a superb painting. But the last spot that I want to take to you in the home of Pierre and Marthe Bonnard is his dressing room, which is where he sets some of the paintings that you saw in the slide just beyond. Now, I think Bonnard probably slept in this room. It was certainly the room, not where he bathed, but where he shaved and brushed his teeth and whatever, where he kept his clothes. There's a fireplace in here. This door goes out to a common hallway on the top. And this is the view out the window with a sink, some tiles like the ones in the bathroom, and a little glass shelf and a little very ordinary mirror and an electric light hanging here. And there's also, I believe you can't see it, but there's an electric light hanging from the ceiling up here as well. And this painting is made before they acquire that bathroom, but just to show you that he is really interested in depicting himself from the beginning of his life. And here is a painting from the 1930s, so about 10 years before he dies. He's 70-something here. He calls this painting The Boxer, amazingly enough, and titles it that in an exhibition. And I think he's fighting against time. And there's the sink, and here is a picture that I took of what you see when you look in this mirror. So notice that what you see behind you are these cabinets and this little shelf and a painting on the wall. This is probably himself imagining himself in front of this mirror, I believe, but I'm not sure. This is 1931 or 2. And here is the view that I was in when I took the picture of myself, with a little shelf here, the frame print on the wall, and the cabinets behind, the tiles, and the edge of the mirror just here. And this is the subject of his last great self-portraits, which show his simultaneous, he's alone now. Marthe is gone. She's been gone since 1942. This is probably painted in 1945 or 46. And he's basically living by himself and just kind of waiting, I think. And he's in the house at Le Canet. They sold the house in Normandy. He almost never goes to Paris. And he's living down in this beautiful house, in this beautiful, modest little house in the south of France, and painting and painting and painting, including your great picture here in Richmond, but also this amazing self-portrait. And it's those eyes. He's taken his glasses off, and he's looking at the eyes, which are maybe beginning to go bad on him or to fail him a little bit. But there's a sense, I think, incredible sense of humility, a total lack of self-consciousness in a way. Even though he's painting a self-portrait, it is extraordinarily honest and brave, I think. And this is how he was at the end of his life, and how I think we should remember him. So thank you very, very much for coming to hear me this evening.